Greetings, fellow men of culture. As always, I come to you live from the peak of Thundercock Mountain. Many people think of the Game Boy Color as the original Game Boy's inbred cousin. It's kind of a half step in terms of hardware generation. But fuck those people.
You know, I have a secret I'd like to share with you. Come a little closer. You're a little bitch.
It has the same form factor as the Pocket, but dazzles the whispering eye with 56 entire colors on screen. I am a little biased towards the Game Boy Color, since it was the first handheld that I ever owned that was entirely mine. I won it as a first place prize in a father-son bowling tournament when I was 8 years old. My dad used me as the bowling ball.
Nice cock.
It only enjoyed about 3 years on the market before getting its entire ass eaten by the Game Boy Advance. But in that time, it got some great games, not just Pokemon games. There's also an awesome backlit OLED screen mod out there that's not difficult to install, something I'm planning as a personal project of mine. You can also emulate the entire library on a butter churner, so it's never been easier to play these games. In this video, I want to talk about 10 of the best Game Boy Color hidden gems.
Oh, these are pretty cool bananas.
Hamtaro Ham Hams Unite stands out as more than just something you put in your ass. Given the subject matter, it's a game that surprised me with its quality. Based on the popular Chinese cartoon for children, Hamtaro has you on an adventure as some sort of autistic pig or something, on a quest to seek out his clubhouse members and fill in the words in the Ham Chat dictionary. This was a late release for the Game Boy Color, and the last published by Nintendo for the console, so it benefits from late-gen optimization that you can see in the visuals. This is getting very near to Game Boy Advance in terms of sprite work, with lots of great animation. It's primarily a kid's game with all the diabetes-inducing cuteness from the anime, but Hamtaro's oddly compelling gameplay makes it stick out as a higher quality title than it has any need to be. Survival Kids feels like a precursor to the tons of crafting and survival games on Steam. You take control of a fetus on an abandoned island, and the game gives you zero direction, leading to an entirely open-ended gameplay experience. You need to poke around the island in order to make progress, slowly gathering tools and methods to collect water and hunt for food. The game is impressively complex for a Game Boy Color game. You need to manage your hunger and thirst as you explore, as well as gather materials to build new items such as a bow and spear. As you make your way to new parts of the island, you'll come across more dangerous areas to explore, and you need to make sure you pack enough food and water for the journey. Survival Kids feels way ahead of its time, and is a great example of the Game Boy Color hosting titles that punch way above their weight. Warlocks is a technical marvel in the Game Boy Color, being the only real-time strategy game on the handheld. The game is split into two factions, humans and beasts, and each has their own 12-chapter campaign to play through.
Me not that kind of orc.
The usual RTS stuff is here, like fog of war obscuring the map until you get near, as well as resource gathering to build your own buildings to produce combat units. Each faction has a few unique units to them, such as wizards that can poison enemy units or turn them into filthy pigs. Despite good reviews, Warlocks sold poorly. Maybe because real-time strategy games were purely the domain of PC at the time, and they still are mostly. The last place you'd expect to find an RTS game at the time was the Game Boy Color of all things. The scope of the game is limited by the hardware, and selecting units is a little cumbersome considering the limited buttons on the GBC, but Warlock somehow manages to pull off an enjoyable RTS experience that was way ahead of its time. As Your Dreams for the Game Boy Color is the conjoined twin that the PlayStation version resorbed in the womb. This is a roguelike dungeon crawler, and as I write this, I'm realizing how ahead of their time a lot of these Game Boy Color games really were. You play as a young reprobate named Cock who aims to follow in his deadbeat dad's footsteps and explore the Tower of Monsters. Floors are randomly generated. As you explore, you fight monsters, collect eggs that hatch into familiars, and collect weapons and armor. Every time you leave the dungeon, everything resets, but you keep all of your upgraded familiars and equipment. The Game Boy Color version lacks the town building and dating mechanics of the PlayStation version, but in exchange it gets double the number of monsters and 100 more floors of the dungeon. As Your Dreams came out over 15 years before the roguelike structure in gaming really started to get popular, and I think it deserves recognition for that. Legend of the River King 2 is a surprisingly expansive fishing JRPG with more depth than I was expecting at first. Play as either a small mongoloid or a teenager, each having different starting stats, and set on a journey to catch both the mountain god and the sea god, who have turned themselves into fish because they're stupid. The core mechanic is of course fishing. There's a number of different rods and baits to choose from, with different combinations being more effective for different species of fish. Different locations also offer different species, as well as the time of day or night. Your character's stats affect different aspects of your fishing performance, such as your current HP affecting how far you can cast. When you get a fish on the line, the game switches to an in-water perspective and turns into a psychological horror game, where you need to tire your catch out slowly. and reel them in at the proper times to prevent your line from snapping or the fish getting away with your bait. There's also some very light traditional turn-based battles with animals, where you have to beat them to death with your bare hands, I guess, which is kind of funny. The game does have some arcane fishing mechanics that are baffling at first. Games back then required you to read the manual to figure out what's going on, but once you get a grasp of the surprisingly in-depth gameplay, Legend of the River 2 is a relaxing JRPG that really impressed me with how much it offers on a portable console. Samurai Kid is a Japan-exclusive puzzle platformer that sees you playing as a ninja child on a quest to save his country from the Demon King. The first thing that sticks out is the visuals. This was a late-generation release for the Game Boy Color, coming out in 2001. Animations are some of the best on the console, and the sprite work is excellent, with big and expressive enemies and bosses. Samurai Kid also has a large amount of content for a Game Boy Color platformer, with 10 levels that all make fairly good use of the main character's 3 weapons. The katana can break several different block types, the gourd turns enemies into movable blocks for solving puzzles, and the fan is like a taunt used to lure enemies where you need them for specific purposes. A few levels have their own unique gimmicks like a drill that can break blocks above your head. Samurai Kid is often compared to the likes of Wario Land 3, but I personally prefer Samurai Kid because samurai are a lot cooler than stupid, short, evil plumbers. I don't know if Wario even is a plumber. There's a fan translation of the game, thankfully, so it can be played in English through emulation, which is good because original cartridges are expensive. Besides some cumbersome control quirks, Samurai Kid holds up pretty well as a puzzle platformer, and is a great showcase of the kinds of animation that was possible in the Game Boy Color. Daikatana is notable for the fact it's one of the rare instances of a portable version of a game being far superior to its PC and console counterpart. Daikatana is one of the most infamously bad video game releases of all time, one that left a permanent mark on John Romero's incredibly ageless face. It's odd that the Game Boy Color version is such a creamy delight despite its source material being so notoriously bad. This is due to the Game Boy Color version being developed entirely separate from the main game at John Romero's request, so the finished product resembles 2D Legend of Zelda titles much more than an edgy first-person shooter. The premise is the same. You play as Hiro Miyamoto in his quest to stop the bad guy from using the Daikatana's time-traveling ability to change history. The general gameplay takes place from a top-down perspective. There are dozens of levels that each have their own combat challenges and puzzles to solve. There's a number of weapons to use as well, including your basic sword, some ranged weapons like the pulse rifle, and the taser hook, which was a weapon that was removed from the PC version of the game during development. Daikatana is a great action puzzle game. If you played Link's Awakening or the 2 Oracle Zelda games 100 times by now, Daikatana oddly captures the same vibes. Along with Warlocked, Cannon Fodder is one of those technical Marvel games on the Game Boy Color. It's a top-down shooter that features visuals and sound that seem impossible to fit and function on a Game Boy cartridge. The game opens with a full-motion video cutscene, which is crazy on its own, but then you start to play and there are some rudimentary 3D rendered menus as well as voice lines, something that was mostly in the domain of CD-based consoles at the time like the original PlayStation. You take control of 2 little army guys running around shooting everyone. The D-pad moves your aiming cursor on the screen, the B button shoots, and oddly enough the A button moves your guys to the location of your crosshairs when you press it, similar to moving units in a real-time strategy game. The game is less about fast reaction time to enemies spawning in than it is about you carefully moving your squad around the levels to bait enemies, into engaging with you while you have cover in the environment, or far enough away on screen for you to move and shoot them. Cannon Fodder uses the Game Boy Color's very limited controls to good effect for a game like this. Having direct control over a character on screen as well as a floating cursor I'm pretty sure is unique to this game. Closest you would normally get to a game like this on the Game Boy Color is a scrolling shooter. The fact that developers were able to fit so much on a Game Boy Color cartridge is astounding, and it's something else entirely that they were able to make a genuinely fun game as well. Metal Walker is a unique take on the Pokemon formula that I'd never played until just recently. The game takes place in far future Detroit, where a valuable metal called core is discovered and people try to use it to manufacture weapons. This backfires when everything explodes, turning Detroit into a desolate wasteland for the second time. The land is renamed the Rusted Land, which is where Metal Walkers takes place. The research and its awesome explosion resulted in a bunch of nasty robots known as Metal Busters to take over the area as its only inhabitants. You play as a young boy who sets out with his father to the Rusted Land to retrieve the lost core that remains intact, but your father abandons you to fend for himself, which is only right. So you and your robot companion Metaball set off to find the rest of the cores yourselves. The game is very similar to Pokemon and other JRPGs. It's played from a top-down perspective. You visit towns and explore dungeons, and there's a creature collecting mechanic. Where it differs drastically is its combat system. Battles take place in their own little boxed in arena, and it's very similar to pool or pinball in how it progresses. The main way to attack enemies during battle is to manually aim your Metal Walker friends either directly at enemies or against walls or other obstacles, so you can roll into multiple enemies in a single turn. You can throw items into the arena that benefit your walker, such as a healing capsule that activates when you roll over it, or napalm that damages enemies when they roll over it. Defeated enemies drop scrap metal that can be used to create new Metal Walkers that have their own strengths and attributes. Defeating bosses grants core units that you can use to evolve your Metal Walkers into new forms. so this game even has evolution. A creature collecting game can come in almost any genre, so I don't know why more developers haven't thought outside the box more like Metal Walker does. It's a fun JRPG with a really unique battle system that can be iterated upon so much further if any modern game developer runs with the idea. Pocket Bomberman is usually overlooked in the Game Boy Color, since there's also a pretty good Bomberman RPG on the console as well, but I've really taken a liking to this more traditional platformer Bomberman game. You play as the Bomberman out to collect magical MacGuffins, and the only way to do that is to blow everything up. There are more than 30 levels here, and I like that this game takes the fundamentals of old school Bomberman and creates challenges around that in the setting of a 2D platformer. Timing when to place bombs so you can damage enemies and destroy blocks while also getting yourself out of the blast zone forces you to approach every level with a bit more risk assessment, since you have to plan your escape route as you approach enemies. As with the original Bomberman, you need to be careful not to block yourself into dead ends with your bombs, and be aware of how far the blast will reach as you collect little fire power-ups to increase your explosion range. There are a number of bosses as well that throw some complexity into the combat, as you need to time your bombs to hit the boss and not yourself, while the boss is hurling projectiles and slurs at you, as well as other enemies in the arena trying to kill you at the same time. The mid-90s were a time of experimentation for Bomberman that resulted in some great games with the character. You don't see him very much these days, which sucks, but there are still solid titles like Bomberman Pocket in his library. That's my list of the top 10 Game Boy Color hidden gems. There's no way I covered every little known game on the handheld, so if there's any that you enjoy, let me know in the comments. If you liked the video, I'd greatly appreciate a like and subscribe. If you want to hear about some Game Boy Advance hidden gems, click on the video on screen.